Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, business, education, whatever gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, on this somewhat gray November 1st by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing okay for being, I'm upright on the Day of the Dead, so that's good.
Yeah.
And,
better than the alternative.
Yeah, looking forward to the election being over with this week. So,
will it be over with, though?
Well, for the most part.
I guess we'll find out.
We don't cover the one that would still be going on.
That's right.
My mailman will appreciate it. My mailman will definitely appreciate the less loading my box with more and more flyers that I've been getting.
Yeah, that's Seth Barber, our producer, ladies and gentlemen, and you happen to live in one of the more competitive state legislative districts, so you are getting lots of mailers. Scott and I live in a not at all competitive state legislative district, and we are not getting those mailers.
No, I'm kind of lonely over there. I feel neglected.
Nobody's paying any attention to us. All right. Well, we are, of course, going to talk about the at the moment still ongoing election. Early voting ended this week, and we have some final numbers to look at there. We will also talk about District 2, the congressional race that we have here, as well as one of our state legislative races in District 89. Also, some interesting discussion about the future of the Knox County Schools Clothing Center. Not the kind of thing that you would expect to generate a lot of controversy or angst, but there we are. The Tennessee Valley Authority has a new plan laying out its future energy sources and resources. Talk about that. And a resolution that came to County Commission last year and was kind of soundly kicked to the curb, having to do with the sexualization of children, quote unquote. That is coming back. We will talk about that a little bit. But yeah, Scott, I think we have to start with the election, and early voting just ended. We're recording this on Friday. It just ended yesterday. Halloween was the final day of early voting, and just this morning we have cumulative numbers from Knox County Election Administrator Chris Davis. What does it look like?
Well, the in-person early voting turnout was caveat, turnout's always bad in Knox County, Tennessee in general. Turnout is usually abysmal. So
Tennessee does have pretty much the lowest voter turnout in the country consistently,
but it's up compared to 2020, which was a good sign. 163,303 people voted early. 4 years ago was 153,000 and change.
About 10,000 more.
About 10,000 more. So that's good. The absentee and nursing home vote is a little bit off. We don't know yet how much lower it's going to be because they accept, ballots until Election Day, by mail. But as of Thursday, only about 7,503 ballots had come in by mail, so or by going to nursing homes and getting a vote there, which I think is a really fantastic thing that they do. And there were more than 21,000 voted by mail in the 2020 election. Of course, that was the height of COVID. So a lot of people
that was an unusually high absentee ballot year. We're kind of returning to normal levels this year.
Yeah. In 2016, about 6,000 voted absentee. So we're getting back to normal. So
it's a little hard to tell at the moment. By the time we get to election day and election day voting, whether our total voting for this year will be up over 2020 or not. We just don't know that right now.
Yeah. My guess is it'll be a little bit lower. Right now we're, 10,000 over as far as in-person voting and 14,000 under when you talk about absentee ballots. And of course, that number will change between now and Tuesday. So,
and in 2020, the total ballots cast in the whole election, counting early election day votes, absentee votes, etc., was right around 222,000. We are right now sitting at just a little over 170,000. So basically, if election day voting this year is in the vicinity of 50,000, that'll put us about where we were in 2020. If it's a lot higher than 50,000 on election day, then we will see an overall increase.
Yeah, it was about 47,000 in 2020 on election day. So turnout will be somewhere in the same vicinity, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less even, but pretty much the same.
And if we hit that, our total registered voters in Knox County is like 336,000, but the ones who they classify as active voters, meaning that they have voted in recent elections, is about 318,000. So we are right now over 50% turnout of the total voting base. We could get up in the vicinity of about a 2/3 turnout, right?
Yeah, that would be that would be reasonable to assume that's where we could land somewhere.
Mm-hmm. So what do we know about, because Chris Davis did send out to all of us in the media an interesting breakdown just this morning of what they know about the demographics of those voters. So what does that look like?
Well, as always, older voters are the ones who are going to polls in higher numbers. A little bit more than 87,000 people who are age 55 or older have voted so far. That's a little more than half of the total. So young people are, there's been a big push to get young people to register to vote. They usually don't vote in big numbers. About 22,000, 120 young people, people 18 to 29 have voted. I don't know yet, and exactly how the vote breaks down, but for the last 4 days, turnout was pretty good at the. They put an early voting location at UT voting, and it was pretty decent turnout there. UT folks, UT students tend not to vote in huge numbers. They haven't had an early voting location before. We could find out what that breakdown is eventually, but we don't have any way of knowing, how many of those voters there were, students in their 20s, how many were faculty members, how many were staff members, that sort of thing. It stands to reason that most of them would have been students, but that'll be interesting to find out. Women are by far outvoting men in this. We so far 165,000, almost 166,000 women have cast ballots.
That's that you're looking at registered voters.
I'm sorry,
again?
excuse me, I am again. I'm sorry, 82,873 women have cast ballots so far, and 65,627 men. But we've got 22,000 voters. We don't know the gender because they apparently filled out the federal voter registration form when they registered to vote, and that doesn't ask for your gender.
But there's no reason to think that there would be a lot of gender difference in who fills out the federal form, and so it is likely that we are seeing a higher female turnout.
Yeah. The assuming that the registration breakdown, the gender breakdown for registration just remains the same, and it probably is, or close to it.
And that is in line with what's being reported around the country to the degree that people are able to discern the information. Women appear to be turning out at a higher rate than men, and at the national level having to do with the presidential race, that is causing, of course, there are things on sort of both sides of the equation that are making one side or the other nervous. But one of the things that's making some people on the Republican side a little bit nervous is that gap. And I saw some high-profile conservative influencers in recent days have taken to social media really beseeching men to get out and vote because polling suggests that women are supporting the Democrats and Kamala Harris much more strongly than they are Donald Trump. So it's interesting to see, of course, Knox County, overall a fairly Republican county, but it's interesting to see that breakdown here at the local level as well.
Oh, yeah. And there's that. There is another thing that, we'll see how it works out of the outcome, but a lot of people have talked about how Tennessee women will be voting Democratic because of the abortion ban.
Mm-hmm.
And Tennessee's is one of the most stringent in the country. The candidates are talking about that a lot, and they are saying, at least the Democratic candidates are saying, that that's one of the major concerns that people have that they're talking to. So, that's it'll be, a lot of these questions that we have won't be answered until Election Day.
Right. So we will know a lot more next time we talk to you next week. Well, let's look at the geographic breakdown. And again, what we have from the Election Commission has the votes broken down by which state legislative district, and then for within the city, which city council district voters have voted from. And as usual, looking countywide at the legislative districts, the more Republican areas of the county, the more suburban areas of the county are voting in much higher numbers than the more urban areas.
Yeah, I think you could add more affluent areas.
Yes, right.
The District 14, which is southwest Knox County, perhaps the most affluent district in the
Farragut and Concord,
yeah,
etc.
More people have voted there than anywhere else, 34,000. The District 89, which is Karnes and Hardin Valley, about 28,000 have voted there. So those are the bigger numbers. One race that we're looking at very closely is the District 18 race. 26,000, almost 27,000 people have voted so far in it, and that is that's one that is probably the most competitive of the House races this year.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the districts that represent more urban areas, the two that are currently held by Democrats, District 15 and District 90, those have the two lowest turnout numbers. In fact, if you add, so District 15 had about 13,000 votes, District 90 about 17,000. If you add those two together, that's only a little over 30,000 votes, which is still less than the number of people who voted in District 14.
Right. And none of those three districts is really that, anybody expects anybody other than the incumbent to win. In fact, in District 90, the incumbent is Gloria Johnson, and she's unopposed.
Right.
but yeah, and that's a usual pattern. East Knoxville and North Knoxville, inside the Beltway, they don't vote as heavy numbers as.
Yeah, those are less affluent neighborhoods where you often see lower levels of political engagement. And, a not insignificant item to always mention also is that Tennessee has one of the highest proportions in the country of people who are restricted from voting because they have felony convictions. That's about 7 or 8% of the total population of the state that is not allowed to vote because of that. And those residents tend to be more concentrated in lower income areas as well. So there's a lot of different factors that go into that. But definitely true that election after election in lower income areas, you just see you have fewer registered voters and then fewer people who come out.
And you have things like in my neighborhood, I live across the street from a halfway house where there are, a handful of convicted felons who are finishing up their sentences, and so those types of facilities are located in poorer areas because the people who run them,
because wealthier areas keep them out.
Yeah, and whoever the people who run them, they're run by individuals for the most part, and they buy cheaper houses and. In less affluent neighborhoods, so that they can afford to do that because you can't really work other jobs very easily and do that. So,
yeah. And so, what about the? We have talked a lot about here the city charter amendments that are on the ballot at the bottom of the ballot, and especially that amendment number 2, which would change all city council seats to being at-large representatives. We also got a breakdown of votes by city council district, and that shows kind of a similar pattern, right? The more affluent areas of the city are voting at much higher numbers than the less affluent areas.
Absolutely. And this is one of the arguments that people who are advocating the rejection of the amendment number 2 on the ballot, which changes would change the way the city votes or runs its elections. The second district, which is West Knoxville, more people are voting there, 11,335. The fourth district, which is parts of North Knoxville and Fountain City, in particular, and all the way over to Holston Hills, across North Knoxville. But nearly 11,000 have voted there. Combined, those two districts account for nearly half of the 50,000 or so who voted inside the city limits of Knoxville.
And that is one of the arguments that people who have opposed the amendment and the change to an all-at-large system have made, is that in an all-at-large system, a couple of districts, a couple of areas of the city are going to have their interests more represented just because they do come out and vote more. And, people can argue that, well, that's a solvable problem. You just have to get the people in the other districts to come out to vote more. And that is theoretically true. And yet this is a pattern that we see over and over and over again.
Yeah. These districts are relatively the same population. So when you have, the 6th district, which is East Knoxville over through downtown and up to Mechanicsville, it even goes all the way over to West Haven and touches into Pond Gap. So it's a kind of sprawling district. But about 5,700 people have voted there. And that's
like half the number of District 2, basically.
Half the number who voted in District 2. And one of the things is that when you talk about Amendment 2, if they go to this completely at-large system, then the only the second district alone would have a bigger say in who is going to represent the 6th district than 6th district voters.
Yep.
That's You can argue whether that's good or bad, and people are, but that's pretty much just a fact that those votes will count more.
Well, it looks like overall, if we look at all of these demographics, and again, this is just the early vote that we're looking at. We still do have the actual election day vote to go. But this looks like it's a relatively robust turnout by the standards of our local elections here, but it breaks down along what look to be very familiar lines, with the possible exception of that the gender split, that, women, there are more women registered voters in Knox County than men, but what we're seeing so far, again, to the degree that they know the gender of the people who are voting, women are right now kind of overrepresented in the turnout, it looks like.
Yeah, and but like you said, it's if we had done this, taped this broadcast or podcast 2 days earlier, before early voting ended, we probably would have made all these predictions.
Yeah,
at least we would. I mean, it is very familiar, the way that we might have gotten the numbers wrong, but we would have had the broad strokes of it right, because
the news is that there's not really news. It looks like a more or less normal election, at least by the numbers. That doesn't mean that we know who people are voting for, but we know that the areas and the sort of demographics of people who are voting. Well, let's talk about a couple of races specifically. You wrote about both of these this week. Of course, our representative Tim Burchett is running for a fourth term, representing the 2nd District of Tennessee in Congress. He is running against Democrat Jane George. Burchett, as we have talked about a lot on the podcast, has attracted a fair amount of attention in this past term in particular. He was one of the 8 Republicans who voted to unseat Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. He has been well known for his work trying to bring out information about UFOs and what the government knows about that. He has been sued for alleging that a guy who was involved in some events in Kansas, right? He's being sued by a guy in Kansas for saying things about him on social media.
That was one of the shootings. Is it Kansas City?
Yeah. Kansas or Missouri, one of those. Someplace out there. He's been sued. He's made a lot of news, gotten a lot of attention. Certainly not all of it what you would necessarily call positive, and yet it doesn't really look like any of that is likely to have a whole lot of effect on his. This is just a very Republican district that he's representing.
He represents a very Republican district. He's always said kind of off the wall things, and it's kind of his aw shucks, good old boy persona. That was, and I think that's one of the things that some of the national media people kind of latched on to as well. They love, they love that he talked like a Southerner, and he loves the limelight. So I mean, it's been a kind of an interesting thing. It doesn't hurt him here too much, I don't think. It is a very Republican district. This is a district that has voted Republican almost as long as the Republican Party's been around.
Yeah.
And the only reason they didn't vote, the district did not vote Republican at the founding of the Republican Party, is there was already a staunch unionist Whig in office, Horace Maynard, and he didn't become an actual Republican until a couple of years after the Civil War ended, and since then there's been a Republican in the seat, with no exceptions, and usually the vote's not close. So
yeah, I mean, I guess the thing to watch really will be what percentage, does his percentage change? He typically gets more than 60% of the vote in the district. So, does any of the various shenanigans that he's been engaged with in one way or another. Does any of that affect his actual vote total? Jane George, if the Democrats were going to draft the perfect candidate to run against Burchett, it probably nothing against Jane George, but she is not, I think, the kind of candidate who's likely to make a whole lot of people sort of like reach across the aisle.
Yeah, well, she's first of all, she's run for office once, but she's never held office, so she doesn't have a track record. She's in most of her, she's a reliably liberal Democrat. She's an engaging person. She comes across very well, but I think that if the Democrats ever hope to unseat Burchett or any other Republican running in this race, they're going to have to run somebody who has been in office before,
significant name recognition. Of some kind.
It would have to be somebody like that, and I don't know who that would be right off the top of my head. Maybe that's something that had Gloria Johnson not run for Senate would have been within the realm of possibility. There,
she at least would have been a more familiar name and face to a greater number of people. I mean, the speculation that we hear a lot about Burchett is that if Burchett were ever to be successfully challenged, that would be more likely to come in a Republican primary than in the general election, just because the district is so Republican overall. Of course, that didn't happen this year. He hasn't had a primary opponent since his very first run for the seat. There is speculation out there that, there might be some faction of disaffected Republicans who might look for somebody to do that in a future race. But for this year, obviously that didn't happen.
Well, one thing is most Republican incumbents who get primary challenges, the challenge comes from the right. And some of the things that Burchett has done, he's unassailable from the right.
Yeah.
The McCarthy vote, some of the he never votes for spending bills ever. It's just he because he says because there's always pork in them or something he doesn't like. Well, that's kind of the case with every spending bill. It's the nature of the beast up there. But he votes no on all of them. He votes against raising the debt limit, which it's never been done before, but it's come up for votes several times.
And he uses on his social media feeds, he uses fairly crass language to talk about immigrants, to talk about transgender people. He has very much adopted the language of kind of the hard right on a lot of these issues. So he's unlikely to get a challenge from that end of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, you'd have to have an outraged moderate Republican right. So.
Yep. Okay, and let's talk about District 89, the state legislative district that, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, covers Karnes and Hardin Valley, kind of the northwestern corner of the county. Again, a very Republican area. Justin Lafferty, likewise seeking his fourth term there, and he is running against Democrat Cary Hammond.
Yeah, similarities between Lafferty and Burchett. Like you said, he's running for his fourth term, just like Burchett. The district is strongly Republican. He usually gets close to 70%, or about 70% of the vote. In the general election, he's he is. It's interesting. His first run, he had a big primary fight. And it was an upset because there were 5 people in the race. 2 of his opponents were former Sheriff Tim Hutchison and former state legislator Stacey Campfield, both heavy hitters in the GOP. Both basically split most of the vote, and then Lafferty sneaked ahead of him, essentially. And then once he won the Republican primary, he was a shoo-in in the general election. he gets some notice too in the media. It's kind of funny because he's kind of a for the most part a relatively quiet legislator,
including with the media. He once again declined.
He doesn't. He doesn't. He's really friendly when I talk to him in person. He's really friendly and really nice. He just doesn't want to talk to me for an interview. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, he is very, he doesn't make a whole lot of waves for the most part. When he does, it's big. He famously or infamously spoke from the House floor in 2021, talking about how the 3/5 compromise in the U.S. Constitution was designed to kind of lay the groundwork for ending slavery.
Yeah,
which is the exact opposite of what it did.
Right.
And I'd never even heard of anybody making that argument before. That was strange. But he got a lot of attention for that. And then last year, when the whole controversy about the Tennessee 3 was going on, and that's of course the 3 Tennessee House members who were subject of ouster proceedings after protesting gun violence on the floor of the House. He and one of the Tennessee 3 got into an altercation where he was accused of shoving one of the other members. He denied doing that. It was just there was kind of a melee that was going on there. A lot of
it was Justin Jones.
Justin Jones, yes.
They got in each other's faces a little bit.
Yeah,
is I think the way we would phrase this if you were watching this happen at a sporting event.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they did get in each other's faces, and there were allegations that Lafferty pushed Jones and all. So that made, of course, because the Tennessee 3 was already making national news, that thrust him, Lafferty, into the national news. Now the 3/5 compromise brouhaha had no effect whatsoever on his getting reelected in 2022, so his conduct during the Tennessee 3 thing probably won't have much of an effect on the vote. Nobody's really talking about it a whole lot. I mean, Hammond didn't really bring it up when she was talking about it. She is another person she's really bright, and she would make she lives in the wrong district because she's really bright. Again, like George, she's very she's very much a traditional progressive person. So anyway, but
a normal liberal Democrat,
normal liberal Democrat, however you want to phrase it. She has she's a real realist. She would she says she'd like to see go back to the Dobbs decision, Roe versus Wade model of abortion policy, but is realistic to know that we need to at least get to making exemptions for rape, incest, and the health of the mother. And she's she's really bright. She's from Oak Ridge. She worked for more than a decade in the financial world in New York. Came back after COVID-19 and decided she wanted to make a difference.
So she is running in a difficult district, and with a lot of these kinds of races, we talked about this with the District 14 race the other week with Jason Zachary against Amanda Collins. I think, of course, all of the Democrats running in these races say they are running to win, and obviously they are. That's the outcome that they're hoping for. But I think sort of what the Democratic Party is hoping for, and the Democratic Party is doing a much more aggressive job these days of actually contesting some of these races, which there have been times in the recent past where that wasn't true. But I think what they're looking for is like moving the needle a little bit. Like if somebody wins by 18 points one year, you want to see if you can, if you see some progress there, can you knock it down to 12 or 13 points? I mean, that it's more, I think, an incremental strategy over time. Yeah. The difficulty with that is that, especially with these legislative races where you have to run every 2 years, it's like every 2 years you're looking for, a good, solid candidate, like you're saying with Hammond, who's willing to go out there and take on, a very difficult electoral challenge.
Yeah. But one of the things that's interesting there is, I don't know how much to read into this. Lafferty isn't really campaigning a whole lot. Mm-hmm. He hasn't changed his website between 2022 and now.
Again, similar to Zachary, who doesn't even have a campaign website.
And he doesn't do appearances. He doesn't go to forums. He doesn't give interviews to the media. We aren't the only media that he has ignored during the election. Hammond has actually outspent him. He's got lots of money. He could outspend her, 10-1, but she has actually put her money down, and you don't really need you don't need that much to run, and she's done a good job of using her money in the campaign. So you don't know how that might have an effect. And you were talking about Democrats and their incremental strategies. Yeah, I think that any time a Republican gets less than 60% of the vote, that the local Democrats consider that a victory.
Right.
I mean, not a victory, don't get me wrong, but a positive development.
Yep.
That's what happened.
Because there are not many, especially in these state legislative seats that are held by Republicans, there are not many of them where the Republican typically gets under 60%.
Yeah, District 18 is an exception. It is one that because Elaine Davis didn't get 60% of the vote.
She got 54%, right? 2 years ago.
2 years ago, that was the Democrats were confident enough. I think, well, if we can take her down next time, and Brown Goldberg is running a pretty good race. He's got some support from more moderate Republicans, and the Democrats
raised a lot of money, sending out a lot of mailers, as Seth was just talking about.
So there is so in that sense, that Democratic incremental strategy could, emphasize the could, pay off in a victory there, in an upset of an incumbent. So.
Right. Well, those are among the questions that we're going to know the answers to in the very near future. We will certainly be back here next week to try to figure out what happened. In the meantime, a couple of non-electoral items to hit on, if you can believe it. The Knox County school system has a sort of interesting issue with something called the Clothing Center, which is a nonprofit operation that has been affiliated with the school system for decades. It actually started back in 1930 as a sort of an adjunct to the old Knoxville City school system. It was run by volunteers, so it started during the Great Depression, and the idea was to accept donations of clothing and donations of money to buy clothing that could then be distributed to students who need clothing. And so it has continued that operation ever since in one form or another. When the old city school system shut down in the late 1980s and got absorbed into Knox County Schools, Knox County Schools absorbed the clothing center along with it. At that time, it was run by a group called the PTA Board. So it's essentially a PTA, Parent-Teacher Association group, but it's not one that's affiliated with any individual school. It's just kind of a freestanding nonprofit organization that exists to run the clothing center. And what Knox County initially did when it absorbed the city schools was it said to, the district officials at the time, and this is going back 35 years now, said to the PTA board that was running the center, "This is great. We want you to keep going. We just want you to broaden your services to include the whole county." And not only that, but the county agreed to pay for 2 staff positions to help support it. And so that's the situation it's been in for the last several decades, where the overall operation is run by this nonprofit volunteer board. The school system has provided 2 staff members to be there every day, and the school system has also provided space or paid for space for them to be in. Recently, the leadership of that board, as of about a year ago, got into talks with the school district about essentially phasing out the PTA board's involvement with it. The school system would then look for another partner. There's been talk about the Knox Education Foundation. There's been talk about the Partners in Education organization. Both of those are, again, sort of like the PTA board. They're nonprofit groups that are closely affiliated with the school system. None of that, this all sounds like not super exciting stuff, right? It's the operation of a clothing center. You're just deciding kind of who's going to be over it. But it has become controversial because what happened was as the old leadership of the PTA board was getting ready to kind of hand off the reins and the school system was looking for other partners to come in and run it, a group of volunteers who had been involved with the PTA board for a long time but weren't in leadership at the time got upset about all of this. And there was a reorganization, and a new set of leaders came into the PTA board determined to maintain, say, no, this is our thing. We run it. We want to continue to run it. By that point, they had already agreed to move the operation from just north of downtown, the old Sears building on North Central, out to the campus of Cedar Bluff Middle School, where the school system has a sort of auxiliary building there that they have moved them to. The PTA board was the leadership that kind of took over in the midst of all this was not happy about the move. They weren't happy about the change to their operations. There were some frictions there. There's been talk back and forth with district officials. This all kind of came into the open last month at the school board meeting because school board member Christy Christie raised concerns about it. Because in September, she had a request from a social worker at one of the schools in her district in South Knoxville who was trying to get clothing for a couple of students through the clothing center and had not been able to. And Christie said that she knew the operation had been moved out to Cedar Bluff, but she believed it was up and running. In fact, that operation was not up and running. When the school year started, they were still kind of in boxes out there at Cedar Bluff, and there were some technical and logistical issues they hadn't worked out. It was not operating. When Christy tried to get clothing for these couple of students, she was basically told, no, we can't do that. And what she encountered was a lot of resentment over the moves that had been made. And the PTA board is now run by Sylvia Woods, who's a familiar name to lots of people in Knoxville and Knox County. She and her husband, the late Harold Woods, have been involved in labor issues in Knoxville for a long time. They're stalwarts of the local Democratic Party, and Sylvia Woods is just a very strong kind of dynamic community leader down there in South Knoxville. And she very much is of the opinion that this is an operation that should remain under the auspices of the PTA board, and she doesn't, she is willing to have a memorandum of understanding, which they have never had. This whole thing has operated on one of these sort of like handshake deals for the last several decades. Local government's interesting that way because you'll occasionally come across these kinds of things where it's like, oh, it's just the way that we do things.
Yeah, it's just, they've always done it.
Right. It's not really written down anywhere. And so now the school system has kind of said, well, regardless of how we operate this, we want it to be a little more formal. We want an agreement. Woods has said that the PTA board is willing to do that. The school administration And then Christie on the school board seemed not necessarily enthusiastic about that because of some of the friction that they've had over the last 5 or 6 months. Christie is still fairly unhappy about the encounter that she had when she tried to get clothes for a couple of kids and was not able to. So this is coming to a head at the school board meeting next week. They're going to meet on Monday, and Christie is bringing a resolution to essentially say thanks for your service to the PTA board and have them phase out as of the end of the year, at which point the school system would temporarily take over operation of the clothing center. One thing everybody says in all of this is we're going to keep the clothing center running regardless, that because it serves an important function, and then that the school system would put out some sort of RFP and take proposals from local organizations or nonprofits who want to run it. That could include the PTA board, Christie said, if they want to put in a proposal, but she wants to open it up. We will see what the rest of the school board thinks. I think that the broader public interest here clearly would be in keeping the clothing center operating because everybody agrees it's a necessary thing. It does actually provide clothing to, hundreds of students across the county. It responds to needy cases on an emergency basis and so forth. So people want to keep that going. Frankly, a little unclear to me if there's a great deal of public interest in, who the specific organization is that runs that as long as it continues to operate. People who are in favor of keeping the PTA board raise a lot of questions about, well, is this really a way for the school system to get rid of this altogether? The school system says no, they absolutely want to keep it going. There will be more talk about this on Monday. But Scott, to me, it was just reminiscent of, we do see this happen a lot, and I feel like it happens in particular a lot at the local government level where, there's just kind of something that's always been there. Everybody's used to it running the way it runs. And eventually you get enough changes in leadership and whatever, or something goes a little bit haywire, as happened here, where suddenly a school board member was not able to get clothing when she was trying to. And it makes everybody sit down and look at it, and nobody can actually quite remember how things got this way in the first place.
Yeah. And, it's one of those things too, that it's always been there. I would guess that very few people, in relatively speaking, few in Knox County even knew that they did this.
Right.
And I think that you're right. I think a lot of people really, I should say don't care, but it's not as big a deal who runs it as long as it stays open. I think that's the thing. One of the things is, how can you say that, providing clothing for kids whose families can't afford clothing is a bad thing?
Right.
So
yes, and nobody is arguing against that, at least not publicly.
But as far as who runs it, I think that the people who are closest to it, obviously, are the ones who are passionate about who runs it, and it's kind of interesting. You can, it is one of those things that's just been done this way forever, and take a look at it, and see, okay, why do we do it this way? Is there a better way to do it? And it could end up being well, let's just keep doing what there apparently haven't been very many problems.
Right. Yes. So there was some difficulties with this transition and moving them and changing the delivery service and everything. It is back up and running now under the PTA board. The PTA board is running it with help from the school system. So, we will see what happens. But I think that one sort of positive thing that can come out of the whole discussion is just raising the profile of the clothing center, hopefully to reach the awareness of people who might actually need it or might know a family who could benefit from it, that it is something that's available to people.
Right. And it has raised the profile, that's for sure, of the operation. If they hadn't moved this, nobody would have even raised an eyebrow, because there would have been a downtime,
right,
for anybody to notice.
Yep.
So So it'll be interesting to see how it kind of plays out as they take a look at this. And
and it can these things can get into, as you say, the people closest to it. There can be personal conflicts. Christy was obviously not happy with the response she received when she sought help, and so I think that she's not happy about that. At the same time, former school board member Jennifer Owen is very committed to the clothing center, and I know is definitely lobbying to kind of try to keep the PTA board involved there. This could be one of these things that plays out to some degree along partisan lines on the school board, even though there's nothing about the issue that's obviously partisan. Anyway,
Sylvia Woods is a fighter. That's one of the things. Yes, she can rub people the wrong way. I mean, she's aggressive when she's got her back up. So we'll see. That'll be and this is one thing that also could, now that it is back up and running and everything's going, maybe just calms down a little bit.
Yep.
So who knows?
We'll see what comes out of that conversation next week. Another story we had this week had to do with the Tennessee Valley Authority's new long-term plan for power generation. Our correspondent Eric Ryberg wrote about this. You can read about it on our website. But Scott, what does TVA say about this, and what do some of TVA's critics say about this?
Well, this is their integrated resource plan. They update it every 5 years. It's a 30-year look at, what will our power generation portfolio look like?
What's the demand going to be, and how are we going to meet it?
Right, those kinds of things. And one of the things that they did in this draft plan is there are a lot of uncertainties, in the future, especially with in the energy sector. So what TVA did was they looked at 6 different scenarios of things like new regulations and removing regulations and things they don't control. And then they applied 5 different strategies to each of those scenarios, so that this plan is less a plan and more of a menu. It's got 30 separate outcomes. Very complicated document. It's got 30 separate outcomes for 30 years down the road. What exactly TVA will look like? Some, down to where they don't have any carbon generating units, and some where things remain pretty much unchanged. And TVA says that this gives us flexibility. We can we have a plan for whatever happens. That at least we have a blueprint for whatever happens. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, which is one of the watchdog groups that has urged TVA to move faster in reducing carbon emissions, basically said that it was so vague in that it doesn't have one or two strategies that they will take. They've just got all these options out that it's almost a meaningless document.
Right. And what they and some other advocacy groups want to see is a firm commitment to specifically to reducing carbon emissions and to moving toward a sort of net zero emissions goal, right?
Right. And TVA has a net zero emissions goal for 2050. Some of the outcomes in these scenarios don't get there. Which is one of the criticisms is, if that's going to be your goal, you got to have a plan to get there, not a plan to halfway there. And TVA's done. They've reduced their emissions quite a bit. They've gone down to about 1.6 million tons of carbon, and the peak was over 100.
Right. They just closed a coal plant in Kingston.
Just closed. Yeah. And one of their strategies. Of course, they got another nuclear unit online at Watts Bar. Nuclear, and then they're converting a lot of their coal plants to natural gas, which, while it does still emit carbon dioxide, it's not as at the same level as a coal plant does. So,
right. And clean energy advocates do not really see gas as they acknowledge that, sure, it's better than coal, but that's not like a place you want to stay. Yeah.
Yeah. That ain't saying nothing. It's just a little better than coal. It's like saying, a filtered cigarette is healthier than an unfiltered cigarette. Right. It's kind of the way they look at it. And, TVA points to that, so, that we're headed in the right direction, and whatever we do from here on out will continue to head in the right direction. But a lot of these groups, like we said, they want to see a firmer plan toward net zero.
And they say there are other major utilities in the Southeast, Florida, for example, that have much more specific and aggressive plans to zero out their carbon emissions.
Yes, and that's of course one of the things is that a lot of these, outside of the Tennessee Valley Authority, there's competition, and so they compete. I don't know who all they compete with, other than Duke Energy and Southern. The big players in the private sector in this region. So, but yeah, they have more specific goals, and for whatever reason, take them at their word. TVA says they want to have the flexibility to have a plan ready regardless of the things that happen outside of their control.
Right. And there is a public meeting coming up on this in the coming week, and you can find the information about that in our coverage on our website if you want to.
It's compassknox.com, by the way.
That's right. If you want to weigh in on it. And I think you can submit comments online as well.
Submit comments online. They're taking public comment on the plan. You can read the plan. It's on the TVA website. Our story links to it. They'll tell you how you can submit comments. It's a very, very long document. You can just read the executive summary if you'd like, but if you want to read all 600 pages, you're more than welcome to do so. They are taking public comment through November 11th on the plan, and then generally speaking, plans like this, the draft plan, which is what you would be looking at, is the one that ends up getting adopted. In some cases, they do make generally minor changes to documents like that, but you can let TVA know what you think. And the TVA.gov is their website, and they can you can go there. Just like I said, we can link from our story. You can go to their website, and it's the Integrated Resource Plan.
Right. All right. Well, one other thing I just kind of wanted to mention this week, we will almost certainly be talking about this more in a couple of weeks when it actually comes before County Commission. But Knox County Commissioner Rhonda Lee is bringing back a version of a resolution that she brought unsuccessfully last year, having to do with quote unquote sexualizing children. And what this does, similar to the one she brought last year, which was tabled by a 10-1 vote by the rest of commission and just kind of pushed to the side, but it says that no county funds or support can be given to any activity, department, outside agency, contractor, whoever who engages in quote unquote sexualizing children. Now, and Lee filed this week for addition to the November agenda of County Commission. This is why we're talking about it, because she has actually filed this resolution, and you can find that linked on our website as well if you want to read the resolution. The challenge with this this year, as it was last year, is understanding what it means by sexualizing children. I mean, on the surface of it, of course, that's the kind of thing that, of course, everybody's against sexualizing children. Like, whatever exactly that means, it sounds bad, right?
Right.
But what is it talking about? What are we talking about when we're talking about Knox County funds going to sexualize children? Well, that's where it gets a little hazy. Yeah. And this year, as last year, Lee has kind of not said exactly. I did get some responses to her in the last couple of days, or from her in the last couple of days about this. And so last year when this came to County Commission, the assumption, it was interesting when the discussion came to Commission, because there were public speakers for and against it. And the interesting thing was, even though Lee had been fairly vague in what she was getting at with this, everybody who talked about it on both the pro and con sides seemed to make the similar assumption that it had to do with LGBTQ people, one way or another, that sexualizing children is kind of code words for kind of anything to do with LGBTQ people. And so some of the people who stood up and spoke in favor of it last year, that's what they said. They said, that's right, we need this. There was one guy who stood up and said, LGBTQ is an abomination, and that's why you need to pass this. Now, Lee insists, including this week in her responses to me, that no, this is not targeted at LGBTQ people. It's at anything to do with sexualizing children. And yet, the couple of examples that she gave to me, because I asked, well, what do you mean? She went to people might remember, there was a couple of years ago a holiday drag show that came to the Tennessee Theater, was not publicly supported in any way, was not funded by Knox County money. It was just an outside event that came to the Tennessee.
It's like a concert.
Right. Like anybody who books the Tennessee Theater. And there was a big to-do over the fact that people under the age of 18 could go to that show and see a drag show if they wanted to. And okay, yes, that there are like all ages drag shows, and that gets back into the whole debate about like is there something inherently obscene about drag performances? And there is in fact not. That has been found by multiple courts, that just because something's a drag performance does not mean it's obscene. Nevertheless, there are a lot of people who are upset about it. So that was one thing that Lee cited, was that, well, the county gives a little bit of money, and it does give, again, a little bit of money to the Tennessee Theater every year. It's a tiny fraction of the theater's budget. And what that money supports is public events and public programming at the theater, which they do. They do community programming, of various kinds year round, and also helps to preserve, we were just talking about the Tennessee a couple of weeks ago, this kind of architectural and cultural gem in the city, in the county. And then the other thing that she cited was that Visit Knoxville, which is our local convention and visitors bureau, has promoted the annual Pride Festival, which is the LGBTQ cultural celebration every year. So on the one hand, Lee says that no, this isn't aimed at the LGBTQ community. On the other hand, both of the actual instances that she cites do involve the LGBTQ community. And also, I asked her a couple of times and did not get a clear answer. What is it about, say, the Pride Festival? Like, what are you alleging in terms of sexualizing children? What about this? What about Visit Knoxville promoting the Pride Festival, or Visit Knoxville having a page on their website, which they do, appealing to LGBTQ tourists and visitors who might want to visit here? That's one of many pages they have on their website, appealing to different groups, demographics, and whatever. What is it about that is equivalent to quote unquote sexualizing children? And again, I did not get a clear answer to that. There will be discussion of this at County Commission's upcoming agenda review session on November 12th, ahead of actually voting on it on November 18th. Maybe there will be some more clarity there about what we're really talking about with sexualizing children. Another thing that was raised last year with this resolution was it could lay the groundwork for people to try to take books out of Knox County libraries on the grounds that they are inappropriate for kids and so on and so forth.
Has anybody brought up cheerleader uniforms as sexualizing children?
No, nobody has mentioned anything about that.
I mean, seriously, the skirts are shorter than would be allowed in the dress policy of schools.
Yeah,
and
yeah, no, right.
I mean, you can really take this to extremes.
Yeah, there are any number of things that somebody could somehow say, sexualizes children. I think the main reason this is coming back this year is that Rhonda Lee, when she ran for office in 2022, her campaign manager was Eric Wyatter, the conservative campaign consultant who we have talked about here many times. And he had a little bit more success, further success this year, getting two more of his candidates elected to county commission, Commissioner Andy Fox and Commissioner Angela Russell. Fox in particular, we've talked about, who is quite a sort of like Christian conservative activist. So I think the assumption by Lee and by Wyatter, and to be clear, it is obvious that this resolution, as last year, Wyatter acknowledged that he was the one who provided the resolution to Lee. This year, when Lee sent in the resolution to the county commission office to be added to the agenda, which went to all the other county commissioners, it was literally she forwarded an email from Wyatter. So again, this is coming from Eric Wyatter. This is an issue that Wyatter is either passionate about himself or sees as politically advantageous. And thinks that he can, last year it got tabled on a 10-1 vote. So this year I think he's counting on having at least a few more people on commission who will, maybe second it and get it into some more robust conversation. There is a lot of speculation out there that the broader goal of this is not necessarily to pass the resolution, although presumably Lee does in fact want to pass it, as to force members of county commission to take a vote on it, and those votes could then theoretically be used against them one way or another in a future election, let's say possibly a future Republican primary.
Yes.
I think that's where a lot of people assume this is coming from. Wyatter says no, or last year anyway. He hasn't responded this year on this. So far, my responses have come from Lee, or they've at least been sent to me from Lee. Whoever's actually writing them. But he says no. He sincerely, his line is, how could anybody be against this? We're just trying to protect children. We will see how much appetite there is on the rest of commission, the sort of non-Wyatter members of commission, to go into this again. But it is coming back.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. It could be just to force votes. I mean, you got Larson J., who's on the commission. He's running for county mayor.
Yep.
How would he vote on this?
Well, he's the one who moved to table it last time, basically saving commissioners having to take a vote on it all. Just say, well, we're just not even going to set this aside.
He probably became the most popular person on commission by doing that
among his colleagues, forcing them to vote on it. And I would say that it's very likely that a move like that would be the response again, with maybe a somewhat different makeup in the vote. Yeah. But the one thing that we talked about with Andy Fox getting elected to commission is that we are likely to see a more aggressive push from the sort of cultural conservative end of the spectrum on commission than we have had. And we've already seen that, 2 months in a row, Andy Fox has challenged the inclusion of references to federal civil rights laws in county documents, showing specific concern about transgender issues. Here, this is being brought back by Lee. I do think we're going to see a higher volume of these things coming to county commission. And this is probably the first big test of how those votes are going to go in the near future. But whatever happens with this vote this coming month, this will probably not be the last of these kinds of resolutions that we're going to see coming from members of county commission. And again, we will certainly be talking about that conversation as it plays out on commission in the coming weeks. In the meantime, Scott, we can look ahead to next week. The school board, as I mentioned, they are meeting on Monday, and their meeting schedule is a little bit different this month. Normally, they have a work session on the first Monday of the month, followed by a voting session on the first Thursday. This month, they're doing both of those together. They're going to do the work session, go straight into the voting session. So it's probably going to be kind of a long meeting starting at 5 o'clock Monday in the Summer Place boardroom. Besides the clothing center issue, which will certainly generate some discussion, they also have, speaking of LGBTQ issues, a handful of policies that they are looking at stripping language out of anti-discrimination and anti-harassment policies that spells out the classes that are protected by federal civil rights laws, which, are race and gender, religion, sexual orientation. It's taking those out and just saying that there cannot be discrimination or harassment against students on any basis. This has been controversial. It refers to a state law that made that same change, although it did not mandate that local school boards make this change. But at both the state and local levels, LGBTQ advocacy groups in particular have raised concerns about this, saying basically, why would you take this out? What message are you sending by taking this out? And they say that the message that would be sent to LGBTQ students and or LGBTQ families in Knox County that the school system does no longer really recognizes or prioritizes them. People who are in favor of it say no. Saying on any basis is sort of the broadest, most universal way you can say it, and that all of the legal protections that currently exist will continue, which is true. But it just comes down to whether people think it's important to kind of send signals to marginalized groups or not that they are supported by the school system.
Yeah, and then about any basis, using that language is just so it is so broad. I mean, you sit there and go, well, when you say any basis and you mean any basis, you could allege, a kid who is playing sports, be on the football team, he doesn't get any playing time,
right?
Or he gets replaced by another
because he's slow.
You're but the basis is he's not as good as the other kids,
right?
That is a basis,
yeah.
And you could argue that he is being discriminated against, by not allowing him to play the sport he wants to play.
True.
I think that's absurd, but absurd things happen in courts all the time.
Yeah. Well, and this change is has been pushed by the Knox County Law Department, which, as we've written about, this is the third time in the last 8 years that the Knox County Law Department has, on a different basis each time, come to the school board and said, oh, we think you need to change this language. So this is clearly something that the law department has a feeling about, that they would just prefer not to spell out these categories. There are people who have suggested that what they're really uncomfortable with, and the law department is a publicly elected office held by a conservative Republican, and that the law department just doesn't like having the phrase sexual orientation in policies anywhere. I don't know. It is clear that this is something the law department keeps coming back to the school board over and over again, saying, oh, we think you should take this out. Oh, we think you should take this out. But the makeup of the school board's a little bit different now than it was last time it came to them. Maybe they will go ahead and make the change this time. That will also get talked about at Monday's meeting. So again, that Monday meeting is probably going to be kind of a long one, which means it'll probably be a little bit of a late-ish night for, say, me, who has to cover it, which is a little unfortunate because the day after that, Scott, Tuesday, November 5th, is also probably going to be kind of a late night because of what?
The election. That's election day.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll want to sleep in Tuesday morning as much as you can.
Yeah.
I intend to do that because it'll be a late night. Election nights always are. One of the things is, we are not covering the race that will most likely not be decided.
Right. We will report the county totals in the presidential race, but that's not our primary focus.
Yeah, we're not gonna stay awake till a winner is declared, because that might be a week, and we need our sleep. But we will be we will be covering this. We'll have the numbers. We'll have we'll have people at both the Republican and Democratic Party kind of election night watch parties. They go on, and the Democrats are going to be at the Mill and Mine, and the Republicans will be at the Crown Plaza. So we'll be we've all voted, so we don't have anything to do till about 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yeah,
tomorrow night.
Election day is always weird as a reporter because during the day, I mean, you'll see, I'm sure like our local TV stations will be out at some polling places talking to people and everything, but really you kind of have to wait for the whole day. It's not until after 8 o'clock at night that any of the actual news you're waiting for starts to happen. The polls close.
They're open 8 to 8. Make sure we know that. And you can go to KGIS or the Election Commission website to, if you don't know where to vote, where your precinct
knoxvotes.org is the Election Commission website.
But you can go there to find out where you need to vote if you don't know, because you do vote in precinct polling places, not the big early voting sites that we have been voting in for the past 2 weeks. Polls will close at 8, although if there is a line at 8 o'clock, those who are in line at 8 o'clock can go ahead and vote. You can't. There will be someone out there to prevent other people from adding to that line, but if you're in line at 8 o'clock, you can vote. So, the returns hopefully will start coming in within an hour of the closing of the polls. Generally speaking, it's the early voting and absentee voting totals come in first, and then the 89, 90 precincts.
One at a time.
One at a time, they start reporting. So it's usually a late night. We'll stay up for it.
We will indeed, and we don't know what's going to happen. We will be back next week for sure to talk to you about what does happen or what has happened by that point. We may be a little bit bleary-eyed and punch drunk, but
the good thing is we won't be recording on Wednesday.
Yeah,
that would be a disaster.
Yeah.
So Wednesday is because and I've said this before. I have no problem staying up late and doing things late and all. It's the next day.
Right. It's the getting up.
It's
part
the getting up part the next day that's hard, especially the older that I get.
Yeah.
So I used to not have a problem with it. I could function on 2 hours sleep, and now if I only got 2 hours sleep, I don't know if I could physically actually do anything on 2 hours sleep.
Yes, certainly your doctor wouldn't recommend it.
No.
But we will be back to talk about all that. We will have some, in addition to the results of the election, we always do some analysis, and with those we'll be mostly looking at our local races and issues. For example, looking at what areas of the county there were any kinds of partisan shifts in, how that District 18 race, for example, breaks down, how that city Amendment 2 race breaks down by the different areas of the city. Those will all be interesting things that we will be looking at. All right. Anything else to add?
I'm done.
All right. Go vote on Tuesday. If you have already voted, do not go vote on Tuesday. That won't work out well for you. Thanks as always to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.